Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly appreciate the comments from some of my colleagues about agriculture and the livestock industry and farmers and ranchers. And Mr. Duffy, I really appreciate you recognizing the importance of agriculture in the CME. But my question, Mr. Edmonds, deals with some background for you. They've held a hearing here on the clearinghouse recovery and resolution last year. One thing we learned is that the certainty about the rights and obligations of affected parties and clarity about who is in control is essential to managing the crisis and restoring order. In your testimony, you briefly discussed the challenges of overlapping regulators during a time of crisis. So while no one expects a clearinghouse failure, if there was a failure at a non-European Tier 2 CCP that was not extended as substituted compliance, is it clear exactly which regulator would be in charge?
As we answer the question today, I think it's difficult for us to say with absolute certainty who would be in charge at that point in time. As Mr. Duffy said, if it were CME Group that found itself in that, there would be problems with the U.S. law here. I mean, certainly we have clearinghouse operations around the world that we would also have local, national regulators at the time having that concern at that moment, wanting to weigh in. So the one word that keeps coming up, and many of us have touched on it here, and really at the epicenter of the issue is whether or not we are creating certainty. And the less certainty we have, or the more uncertainty we create, that's where you begin to see all of the questions and the waterfall of what you might determine bad things happening. Whether it's inside the clearinghouse, there's a lack of certainty when these things take place. Whether it's in the market, the lack of certainty creates volatility. Sometimes that's good and means that people on the right side of that. Other times, if it's overwhelming, like we saw in the financial crisis of the uncertainty, it's really bad for national economic policy or international economic policy at the time. So I can't answer your question with absolute certainty if we would at that time of stress. I think as Mr. Lucan has said, we all want to avoid that. We're all committed to finding ways through that, and if we weren't, we wouldn't be sitting here today and wouldn't be taking the stances we do on the international stage to attempt to drive to that certainty. The worst thing that we can do is wake up and have a customer call us on any one of our venues and say at a given moment in time, what is the answer to this question, and not be able to give them a complete answer. And right now, I think as a whole, until some of the arms race, as Mr. McGuire has articulated, settles a bit, we're faced with that issue of having an incomplete answer.
Thank you. Anyone else care to comment on that question? Okay, my next question goes to Mr. McGuire. You're registered with the CFTC and the same as any U.S.-based clearinghouse, and yet you're domiciled in the United Kingdom. So can you describe to me how that relationship between LCH, the CFTC, and the UK regulators works?
Sure, thank you for the question, Congressman. I think the way I'd describe it simply, it works well. I think the relationships are, you need to think things through, let's say, sunny day scenarios and rainy day scenarios, and the sunny day is business as usual and there's no major defaults or crises, and the rainy days are crises or defaults such as Lehman or MF Global. And over the course of 18 years, with those events, and also with the enactment of Dodd-Frank and European regulation and other regulation around the globe, we've always found a way between LCH with the Bank of England, who is the primary regulator in the UK, and the CFTC, who have oversight as well, to navigate through any of those legal or regulatory texts and always arrived at a sensible outcome. So that has enabled us to be 100% compliant with all of the DCO core principles here in the US. We are fully compliant with and our clients benefit from the client asset protection rules and Part 190 bankruptcy code here in the US. We hold assets onshore. So I think it's a way to show that it is possible to navigate where you are systemically important to a jurisdiction, which we clearly are in this case. It is possible to achieve it. But I think the main point I would say is that the key to that is trust. The key to that is cooperation. The key to that is deference between the regulators and constant communication and transparency.
Thank you. And I'm running out of time, so I yield back, Mr. Chair.